Ava Green had long since given up on the idea of finding love. After her painful divorce from Richard Stone, a man she had once considered her soulmate, Ava had retreated from the world of romance. The man she had married was now a shadow of her past, a painful reminder of her vulnerability. They had been perfect together once, two ambitious young professionals who had seemed to have it all. But as the years went by, something had changed. Richard had become distant, and their marriage, once filled with promise, had become a series of unspoken frustrations and unmet expectations. Ava hadn't expected love to come back into her life so easily. In fact, she had convinced herself that it was something she didn't need anymore. Her career in graphic design was thriving, and she had built a life that was independent, fulfilling, and free of emotional baggage. She didn't need a man to define her anymore, or so she told herself. That's why when her friend Claire insisted on setting her up on a blind date, Ava had been reluctant. "It's time you got back out there, Ava," Claire had said over coffee, her eyes shining with excitement. "You've been working non-stop and you deserve a chance at happiness." Ava had smiled politely, not sure what to say. She wasn't ready for a relationship, not after everything with Richard, but Claire had insisted. "Just one date, I promise you won't regret it." Ava hadn't been able to refuse her friend, and so with a deep breath and a reluctant sense of duty, she agreed. The date would be at a high-end restaurant in the city, a place she never visited, but one Claire assured her was the perfect spot for this type of occasion. The day of the date arrived, and Ava found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror. She wore a sleek black dress that accentuated her figure, with her hair styled in loose waves. She looked stunning, but the nervous flutter in her stomach reminded her that this was more about pushing herself out of her comfort zone than any desire for romance. She was here to do something new, to embrace the possibility of meeting someone who might, just maybe, offer her a glimpse of happiness again. As Ava walked into the restaurant, she was immediately struck by the elegant ambiance. The soft lighting, the crystal chandeliers, and the hum of quiet conversations created an atmosphere that was both sophisticated and intimate. She felt out of place, like a fish in water that was too cold to swim in. But she wasn't here to judge the setting. She was here to meet someone. She scanned the room and saw a man standing near the bar, waiting. He was tall, with dark hair and a sharp suit that immediately caught her attention. He looked like someone out of place in her life, someone who belonged in the world of power and influence. He was exactly the type of man she had once fallen for, successful, charming, polished. He wasn't at all what she expected for a blind date, but she found herself intrigued. As she approached, her heart fluttered, and she did her best to mask her unease with a smile. He smiled back, his expression warm and welcoming. "You must be Ava," he said, extending a hand. Ava took his hand, surprised by the strength of his grip. "Yes, I am," she replied, forcing herself to smile. "And you must be—" "Richard," he said, his smile growing as he looked at her. "Richard Stone." Ava froze. The name hit her like a ton of bricks. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. The name was so familiar, so deeply ingrained in her memories. But there was no way. There couldn't be. "Richard Stone?" she repeated, trying to mask her shock. "As in, the CEO of Stone Enterprises?" Richard looked at her curiously, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. "That's right," he said, his voice steady but confused. "Do we know each other?" Ava took a step back, her mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. Richard Stone, the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the world, the man who had once been her husband, was sitting across from her in a restaurant on what was supposed to be a blind date. She couldn't breathe. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run away. He looked at her again, clearly searching her face for any sign of recognition. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ava blinked and tried to compose herself. I think there's been a mistake," she said, her voice shaky. "I don't know what's going on, but I think we've met before." Richard's face softened as understanding dawned on him. The realization hit him just as hard as it had hit her. The awkward silence between them felt unbearable. They were no longer strangers meeting for the first time. This was a blast from the past, an encounter neither of them had expected. "I'm sorry," Richard said softly, breaking the silence. "I didn't recognize you at first. I didn't know it was you. Ava, I didn't expect this." Ava was still trying to process everything. She had been married to this man, the man who had broken her heart and changed her life forever. She had spent years moving on, healing from the wounds he had left behind, and now here he was, sitting across from her, as if fate had brought them together again. She didn't know how to feel. Anger? Confusion? A strange sense of curiosity? "Why are you here?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you on this date with me?" Richard's face flushed with embarrassment. He sat back in his chair, unsure of how to answer. "I didn't know it was you. I didn't know who I was meeting. I can't believe this is happening." Ava could see the sincerity in his eyes, but the pain from their past was still there, lingering between them. She had moved on, or at least she thought she had, but seeing him again, hearing his voice, brought back all the emotions she had worked so hard to bury. They sat there for a few moments, unsure of what to say next. Richard was the first to break the silence. "Ava, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted our marriage to end the way it did. I've thought about you, about us, so much." Ava took a deep breath. "It doesn't matter anymore, Richard. What's done is done." But even as she said those words, she realized that a part of her still cared. She still had questions, still wanted answers. She had moved on, but the past had a way of lingering, of creeping into the present when least expected. And in that moment, as they sat across from each other, Ava knew that this blind date, this unexpected meeting, was not just a mistake. It was fate. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, their story was far from over. The silence between Ava and Richard was crushing, a mixture of shock, confusion, and somehow a familiar tension that neither knew how to handle. Ava was still processing the reality that the man she had known as her husband, the one she'd had to forget to move on, was sitting across from her looking so different yet still so familiar. Richard was looking at her, trying to find something in her eyes, as if searching for an answer he didn't know where to find. He knew how much he had failed. He knew how much he had hurt her, but there, at that moment, everything seemed completely out of place. "Ava, I don't know what to say," he began, his voice slightly cracking. "I didn't expect, I never imagined we'd meet like this." She looked at him, her mind still spinning as she tried to comprehend what was happening. The elegant restaurant around them now seemed distant, unimportant. All she could focus on was the man in front of her, the man who had been the cause of so many nights of tears and frustration. "I didn't know you were on a date," Ava replied, trying to maintain her composure. "I didn't know it would be you. Why are you here, Richard?" He looked at her, visibly guilty. I didn't know you were the woman I was meeting for the date. I thought you had already changed so much." He paused, his eyes filled with a pain she still recognized even after so many years. "I thought you were someone else, someone who was just a woman on a night like any other." Ava felt a wave of anger rise within her. How could he be so insensitive? How could he have forgotten her so easily? That pain, which she thought she had buried, resurfaced with an overwhelming force. She thought of all the nights she spent trying to understand why he had left her, as if it were something simple, something unimportant. Now here he was, sitting across from her, almost with the face of someone who didn't know what had caused so much damage. She looked at him, unsure whether she was more furious or more sad. "You left me, Richard. You walked away from everything we built, and now here we are, on a blind date, as if time hadn't passed, as if everything we did, everything I felt, was nothing." Richard's expression changed. and he seemed to shrink before those words. He didn't know how to defend what he had done. There was no explanation that was good enough. He knew that his absence in Ava's life had been more than physical. He knew how hard she had tried to move on, to rebuild her life without him. And all he had done so far was sit there and look at her, not knowing what else to say. "I know I messed up," he mumbled, almost breathlessly. I didn't know what I was losing until it was already too late." Silence fell over the table once again, heavy and uncomfortable. Ava looked at him, her emotions in a whirlwind. She had spent years trying to forget, trying to move on and overcome the void he had left. But there, in that moment, she was being confronted with the man who had caused all that pain. He was the same, but at the same time, he was different. He was there, apologizing, but what did it mean? Did she believe his words? Would accepting those apologies open up space for new pain? For a moment, Ava thought about getting up and leaving, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the pain, maybe the curiosity, perhaps the part of her that hadn't completely let him go yet. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I don't know if I can believe you, Richard," she said, her voice calmer than she felt inside. "You left me when I needed you the most, and now you're here with the same words, with the same excuses. But none of that will erase what happened." Richard looked at her with an expression of pain. He knew he had lost something priceless, something he could never recover. He knew Ava was right. Words were empty when trust was broken. He had hurt someone he loved, someone who meant more to him than anything in his life. I understand, Ava. I can't change what happened, but I can try to change what comes next if you give me a chance." Ava stared at him for a long moment, trying to assess if those words truly meant anything. She wanted to believe him. Perhaps somewhere deep in her heart, she still wished everything had been different, that their story hadn't ended that way. But life wasn't a fairy tale, and she knew it. "I don't know, Richard," she finally replied, her voice softer. "I don't know if I'm ready to believe you again." Richard looked at her with a look that mixed regret and hope, but Ava knew that even if he was genuinely sorry, the scars he had left wouldn't fade easily. The silence between Ava and Richard hung over the table, heavy as a loaded cloud about to burst. Both were still processing the discovery that what should have been a simple blind date had turned into something much more complex and emotional. Ava felt the anger within her, but also a strange sense of distaste mixed with nostalgia. She knew him so well, yet at the same time, he seemed like a complete stranger. The man before her was no longer the loving husband she once knew. He was now an imposing, distant CEO who probably barely remembered everything they had shared. But she remembered. Ava remembered everything. She remembered the lazy mornings they spent together, the afternoons when he looked at her with that smile that always made her feel special, and the nights they lay side by side, discussing the future and their dreams. She remembered the promises he had made, the sweet words of comfort during difficult times, and then suddenly he was gone. No explanations, no word of goodbye. He simply distanced himself. Now he was there, sitting across from her, apologizing and trying to justify his mistakes. Ava felt empty and full of rage at the same time. How did he have the nerve to show up after so long? How dare he say he was sorry? He knew how much she had loved him, and how much he hurt her by turning his back on everything they had. "Ava, I know that nothing I say now will change what happened between us," Richard began, his voice tense but laden with sincerity. "I was blind, completely lost back then. I thought success would be enough, but you were always more important. You were always the person who made me feel complete. When you left, I realized too late that I had lost everything." Ava looked at him, her eyes hard and unforgiving. She wanted to believe him. Somehow she still wished he was telling the truth, but the scars he left on her heart were too deep to be healed with simple words. "You left me, Richard. You walked away from everything we built as if it were easy," she said, her voice steady, although she was struggling to maintain her composure. "You gave me promises you didn't keep. You left me here alone, trying to understand why you simply gave up on us. And now you're sitting here telling me you're sorry? You think that's enough? Richard swallowed hard, the weight of guilt visible on his face. He knew that at that moment he had no right to ask for forgiveness anymore. But the pain in his heart was undeniable. He knew he had failed, and that nothing could bring back what he had lost. Ava was right. He left her. He chose his career, the relentless pursuit of more success and power, while she, the woman he loved, was left behind. I am a different man now, Ava. I learned the hard way what truly matters. I didn't know it back then, but now I understand. And maybe, if you let me, I can try to show you that I've changed. But I know it will be difficult. I know I hurt you deeply. Ava didn't know how to respond. What he was saying seemed sincere, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the pain of the past. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds he had caused. She wanted to believe he had changed, that he could be the man she always dreamed of. But the truth was, she no longer knew who he was. The man she loved was lost in a past she was trying to leave behind. She looked at him, her eyes shining with the internal struggle she was facing. I don't know if I can, Richard. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can look at you the same way I did before. What happened between us was destructive. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing those words, as if it were a direct blow to his heart. He knew Ava was right. He destroyed her, and there were not enough words to justify it. He had lost the chance to show her the man he could have been. But still, he couldn't give up. He couldn't just let things end like this. Ava, I understand. I know words aren't enough. I know what I did cannot be undone. But if you give me a chance, I promise you I will prove that I can be the man you deserve. I know I can't undo what happened, but I can try to make things right. Now, Ava took a deep breath, trying to stay calm as her mind raced. Part of her still wanted to believe him. Part of her still loved the man he had been. But another part knew that giving him a second chance would mean opening a door to a pain she wasn't sure she wanted to relive. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. I don't know, Richard. I don't know if I can trust you again. What happened between us was so devastating that I don't know if I can simply erase all of that and start over. Silence settled between the two again, but this time, it wasn't heavy with anger. It was the silence of doubt, of uncertainty. Ava knew that somehow she had to find an answer. She had to decide whether she wanted to risk again, or if she would move on with her life, without him. Time had passed, but the pain was still there, latent. The scars, though not visible, were always present, reminding her of everything that happened. Richard knew their future was at stake at that moment. He could see the pain in Ava's eyes, and he didn't know if he could win her trust back. But he was determined. Determined to try. Determined not to let the past define what the future could be. Time seemed to stand still as Ava and Richard stared at each other, the glances exchanged between them laden with untold stories and years of separation. The weight of the silence between the two was almost unbearable. Both knew this was a decisive moment. Their encounter was no longer just about a dinner or a chance for them to reconnect. It was about facing the past and deciding if there was any possibility of a future together. Ava looked at him, trying to read the emotions that were about to explode. She knew that, deep down, there was still a part of herself that wondered if it would be possible to start over. But at the same time, there was a deep pain, a fear that accumulated within her with every word he said. How could she trust him again? How could she simply forget everything he had done? Richard, on the other hand, was completely vulnerable. He knew he couldn't go back and undo the mistakes he had made. Nothing could erase what happened, but he still believed there was a chance for them. He felt deep in his being that Ava was the person he should have stayed with. He knew he had failed her, but he also knew that if he had a chance, things could be different now. Ava, please, he began, his voice trembling with emotion. I know this won't be easy. I know you're hurt and that what I did was unacceptable, but I never stopped thinking about you. Not a day goes by that I don't regret how everything ended. I love you, and if you give me a chance, I will do everything in my power to show you that I've changed, that I'm a different man now." Ava didn't know what to answer. Her heart was torn. The anger she felt was real and powerful, but at the same time, she felt a sharp ache, as if her heart was being pulled towards something she knew could be dangerous. She looked at him, trying to find some certainty in his eyes, trying to see if he truly understood the gravity of what he had done. But it was difficult. The truth was, Ava still loved Richard in a way she didn't want to admit. She didn't want to give him the power to break her heart again, but on the other hand, she still remembered the moments of happiness, the smiles, the gentle touches they shared. It was difficult for her to simply erase all of that. "Do you think an apology will change what happened, Richard?" she asked, her voice firm, but filled with suppressed emotion. "Do you think saying you're sorry is enough? You left me. You abandoned me when I needed you most." Richard looked at her with eyes full of pain, and Ava knew he felt the same anguish. He wanted with all his might to do things differently, but he knew the trust he had broken could not be rebuilt with simple words. He felt a deep pain in his chest as he saw Ava so broken, so distrustful. "I know I can't erase the past," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But Ava, I'm a different man now. I've learned, and what happened between us is no longer who I am. I want to try, for both of us." Ava looked at him for a long moment, pondering his words. She knew the decision she made that night would shape the rest of her life. But doubt was taking over her heart. Ava had already rebuilt her life without Richard, and it would be much easier to continue on that path where there was no more pain, where she wouldn't have to face the memories of a love that had ended so abruptly. But at the same time, she still loved him. She still remembered the promises he made, the words he said to her before leaving her. It was impossible to forget everything that happened, but maybe, just maybe, she could open her heart again. Maybe she could trust Richard, but it would be difficult, very difficult. She sighed, looking at him with a mixture of pain and sadness. "I don't know, Richard. I don't know if I can trust you again. Part of me still feels love for you, but the other part of me is afraid of being hurt again, afraid of suffering once more." The tension between them seemed unbearable. Richard remained silent, watching her with an intensity she still recognized, and it was at that moment that something unexpected happened. He reached out his hand to her, slowly, carefully, as if asking for permission to touch her again. "Ava, let me try. I won't ask you to forgive me immediately, but give me a chance to show you that I can be the man you deserve. Give me a chance to correct my mistakes." She looked at his extended hand, hesitant, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ava knew that making this decision meant opening a chapter of her life that she thought she had closed forever. But looking at him, she also knew that he was offering her more than empty words. He was offering an opportunity to start over, to rewrite their story together. "You'll have to prove it, Richard," she finally said, her voice firm but full of emotion. "I can't go back to being the woman you knew. I'm not that person anymore. But if you're willing to try, I'm also willing to see what the future holds for us." Richard smiled, the relief visible on his face. He knew the road would be long and full of challenges, but he was willing to walk it. He had lost Ava once, but he wouldn't lose her again. "I promise you, Ava, I will do whatever it takes to show you that you made the right choice. You are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. And now, I know I will fight for that."